Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Improving Scottish Football. Are you fed up with the Scottish Premiership being branded a pub league or a tin pot league by people down south? Would you like to see more of our clubs competing successfully in Europe? Or would you like to see our international teams qualifying regularly for international tournaments? If the answer is yes, this podcast is for you. Please do like, share and subscribe. I know people say this all the time, but this is the first ever episode, so it would mean a lot. I'm your host Kieran. We've got a great episode for you to kick us off. Let's get into it. Okay, right everyone. I am delighted to welcome John Walker as our first ever guest on Improving Scottish Football. John, how are you?
I'm very good. Not as good as my first guest that I had on my podcast, but I'll make do. I think, Kieran. I think I'll be all right.
Who was the first guest on your podcast?
First person I had was Ziggy Gordon, and it was the most fascinating chat. I still like that one. That's one I've listened back to a couple of times. I try to ignore my voice when I'm doing so, but Ziggy Gordon was a great chat. I can't believe he's just playing in Australian lower leagues now.
Yeah, I actually remember listening to I think your last chat with him. So before we go too far down that road, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your connection to football, and a little bit about the podcast that you were running.
Yeah, I started doing my coaching badges like 5 years ago now. I always kind of forget, COVID's robbed me of that. 5 years ago I started doing it, and when I realised I was never good enough to play football at any level, but I always tried playing amateur with my pals. When I realised that the amateur football career was coming to an end, I wanted to stay in football. I knew that very quickly. I'm currently sitting my A licence just now. I'm with Petershill as one of their first team coaches. I've been at Partick Thistle, Kilmarnock, Colts, Darvel more recently, and as you mentioned, I also do Scots Abroad Podcast. And that's interviewing Scottish, not footballers, Scottish sports stars. In fact, no, we've even went in entertainment and music and comedy. So Scottish professionals that have applied their trade outside the UK.
Great. And you were one of the coaches at Darvel at the time of said cup upset.
I was the analyst. I was the video analyst. So I would like to say that pretty much everything I called out in my package is exactly what happened in that game against Aberdeen when the perfect worlds collided.
Nice. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the current situation with Scottish players abroad, because it seems that there might be a bit of a renaissance with some of the players going and playing in Italy and the US, the MLS.
Yeah, I think I would by no means take credit at all for but my Twitter page has grown. I see more and more articles covering people like Liam Henderson, David Bates. Ryan Gauld was huge the year that he was with Farense in the top league in Portugal. You always hear about Jack Henry is probably the one that's kind of shunned the light on it the most, as far as I'm concerned, because he kind of redeveloped his whole career. He left Celtic and went on loan as a bit of a laughing stock, which we talked about on the podcast, how it kind of emotionally damaging and how mentally tough it is being looked upon that. And it's kind of what's backed up my opinion is that these people that get to like Celtic and Rangers, see when you see them and they're not playing well, you're not a bad footballer if you get to Rangers and Celtic's level. That's just not the case. Jack Henry went to Belgium, went to a mediocre side, performed way above his means, got Players Player of the Year, got Defender of the Year, was in Team of the Year, got loads of accolades, got back in the Scotland setup, was part of the Scotland side that got to European Championship, the first major tournament for 20 odd years. And then what's happened with Aaron Hickey at Bologna, Josh Doig falling to Verona, Lewis Ferguson falling out, people are caught on to a little bit about the fact how much value there is in players stealing from Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, getting them into Italy, re-coaching what they need to coach, because they've probably got a lot of the attributes they like, the physicality, the endurance, the ability to keep going all the time, and just add little bits to them that would add value to them, because Aaron Hickey went for 20 odd million after being signed for 2.5. Josh Doig won't go for the same type of money. Lewis Ferguson probably will. So I think the more that happens, the more people will come to Scotland to try and get the next youngsters. I know Max Johnson at Motherwell's out of contract, and he's one that's been linked with Rangers, but a host of teams abroad, and there'll be more.
Yeah, because I guess I'm in two minds about it, right? One is these guys are getting a fantastic opportunity to play abroad, and clearly, like, the coaching, the culture is on, a completely different level. In the same breath, though, we are losing quite a lot of kind of Scottish talent from, the Scottish Premiership. What are your kind of thoughts on that? Do you think it is still generally a good thing that these players are going abroad, or, should we be trying to hold on to them and keep them within our game?
I feel that we need to create a better pathway to get the footballers in there. I mean, the players we're talking about, yes, we're already playing in the first teams of their clubs, but with Brexit, England are coming up and stealing the best youngsters from Rangers and Celtic. So Rangers and Celtic are having to steal the best youngsters from Hibs, Hearts, Motherwell. And that will start to create the point where I think that Hibs, Hearts, Motherwell, etc. are going to have to really develop the talent they get left with to build into their first team, because I just think there's going to be, even with Celtic getting to Champions League football and Rangers getting the group stage and Rangers getting to Europa League final and bringing that extra money into the federation, we all talk about the TV deal to death. We're such a saturated club. We've got no money. We've got no money in this country to develop people, to buy people in. Sorry. I just think we have to develop young players more and give them a clear pathway. And I actually think selling them abroad and selling them down to England is the right way to do it. I think we just need to accept that we're now a stopgap nation, and that's whether it's a Celtic fan that has played with Celtic from under 9s through to 21. The minute an Arsenal comes calling, you're going to Arsenal. That's just the reality.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that we're losing the likes of Ben Doak, just to pick a name. He's got the option of playing. What league is the B team currently playing in? Is it the South the
Lowland
League? Lowland League. So he's got the option of playing the Lowland League against, certain teams that are obviously. I don't want to. I was gonna pick a couple of Lowland League clubs there, and I thought that was a bit mean. But he's not he's not playing against the greatest opposition, and he's got the option to go to Liverpool, where they clearly have like a proper academy structure that is really nurturing that age group. So it's not surprising at all that we are currently losing so many young players, which is pretty awful for the Scottish game. But on the other hand, it is great for these players to pursue the best opportunities that they can come by, and moving to being coached by Jurgen Klopp and actually getting first team experience with Salah and Robertson and everything like that must be amazing for him. When he compares with the his previous choice, which was the Celtic B team in the Lowland League. So yeah, I don't know. Part of me wants to see these Scottish players just be given that opportunity within Scotland. But you can't blame them at all for looking abroad.
No, and one of the things, as a Rangers fan, it's quite interesting. I remember when Billy Gilmour left Rangers and went to Chelsea, and at that point I had a really, really bitter view about it, because I felt like he was the Wayne Rooney, he was the Messiah, he was the golden boy that was coming through Rangers Academy. We'd heard about him from 14, and Graham Murray was talking about him not being far away from playing. And then Billy Gilmour done an interview like a year and a half, 2 years later. Hadn't heard a peep from him, hadn't done an interview for anyone. And it was after he made his FA Cup Chelsea debut against Liverpool and he was man of the match. And he did an interview talking about the fact that him and his family and his agent sat down and they were actually concerned that Rangers were talking about playing him at 16 years old because he didn't think his body had developed. And he thought, and all these players he was saying that played at 16 and the Scottish football tended to get injured and lost parts of their career, and that Chelsea had a more developed plan for him. You would spend a year at the 18s, you would spend a year at the 19s, and it'd be 23s, and then you'd be in the first team. And he felt like Rangers didn't have that understanding or pathway, how to actually get people from A to B. And I think that's something that, if I look at Rangers fans now, they were always talking about Nathan Patterson's not getting enough games, Alex Lowry needs to play more games, and you're like, they don't. These are footballers now who can go to 40 years old. I think that 1920s when we'll start seeing people break in, unless they are an exceptional talent, something that a Lionel Messi, somebody that's Ben Doak's going to be it for Scotland and Liverpool. I think if he avoids injuries, because he is already getting Liverpool experience at 17, 18. It's pretty ridiculous, to be honest.
So you're kind of saying for the kind of 16, 17, 18-year-olds, really the best pathway, for their professional development is actually just to kind of, coach them better and have them playing in, not necessarily in first team games, playing 90 minutes. It is really managing and tailoring their professional development.
On mass, 100%. There's always going to be exceptions to that rule. There are people that are just physically developed above what they need, mentally developed above what the first team have already. And I think that's why we're in this horrible situation where Scottish football's trying to restructure itself, because they don't have the answer of what to do when the boys hit 20. They just don't know what to do. They're really struggling to figure out, do we need more B teams? Do we have a reserve league? Do we restructure the whole league? Nobody actually has the right answer. I don't know if I don't think cramming the B teams in amongst the pyramid above certain levels is the right thing, but I'm kind of happy we're trying something. Not being disparaging, I know for a fact that Rangers and Celtic have loaned out players to low leagues in Scotland and not been happy with the standards of training, the standards of facility that these players are getting put to, which is why they would rather just have a 20s team in the league structure. Because they're like, why would I give over one of my players to a club that's not going to look after him at the standards we think he needs to be? So we'll keep him here and get him in a professional league, and we'll use him and we'll look after him, and we can also make sure that kid is training 4 or 5 days a week, and he's also still doing whatever extracurricular what they want him to do to make sure if they don't make it when they get to 2021, they've got a career pathway, whether it's in sports coaching, whether it's something they've done at university, and try and actually not have this irresponsibility. Because what is it, like 1 in 250 or something footballers that make it? It's not enough. So I think that it's that control.
Bit of a general question here, a bit of a catch-all for you, but obviously you've talked to a lot of players who are all playing abroad in different leagues all around the world. Is there a kind of general consensus to the experience they're getting, in terms of their coaching, in terms of their development, compared to what they had in Scotland?
Yeah. It's the tactical side. Every one of them said the same thing. David Bates was talking about full training sessions being stopped about receiving the ball on your wrong foot. Like if somebody received the ball on the wrong foot or the wrong angle, passing, the whole thing was stopped and it was walked through. Sometimes they'd be walked through without a ball. It would be fully tactical, and you need to know every aspect of what we're trying to do. And it was quite funny because when I spoke to Gavin Ray, he said that's the way the Bonettis were at Dundee. It would be very tactical. It was very about where they pressed when the ball was here, where they played when they had possession of the ball, where they went. And when I was talking to him, I was like, I had to go listen back to some podcasts because I was like, that's Ryan Gold said that, David Bates said that, Jack Hendry said that. They'd all called it out.
A lot of people you talk to, a lot of other, coaches or players in Europe do often refer to us as still a bit of a long ball nation. Do you think that's true? Are you seeing efforts for us to kind of break out of that style of play?
I definitely see it slightly improving. The biggest problem I've got, and I don't know if it's exposure to too much football from England, but as passionate as I am about Scottish football, if there's an English Championship top of the table clash between Burnley and Sheffield United on my TV, or Motherwell versus Aberdeen, I'm going to watch Burnley Sheffield United because I'm going to see better football. I'm going to enjoy the overall game more. But I do think teams in Scotland are trying to bring more of a play through the lines, play out from the back model. It does feel like the only way teams have managed to figure it out is by doing 3 at the back, which is the biggest frustration. That seems to have really risen. And that's a kind of cop-out. But what I tended to see from that was right centre-back to sweeper to left centre-back across, and then right centre-back diag in behind for one of the second strikers. And it then became a wee bit like, it's not really playing out for the goalie's going to centre-half, but the centre-half's then going to do the job the goalie was doing 2 months ago in the 4-4-2 or the 4-3-3. I do think that's definitely still something that I see way too often. But touching on the changes as towards what I'm seeing, Airdrie are only like 10 minutes down the road from me. I went and watched a couple of Airdrie games last season under Rhys McCabe, and they were a really good footballing side. They pretty much consistently played out through the back. He was their holding midfielder, so he pretty much was able to dictate that on the pitch that his team were going to do that. And there was no way around it because he was going to be the guy getting the ball off the centre halves, and that was just what was going to happen. And they played really good football, and they deserved to get promoted. But they proved what a lot of people have consistently said, is you cannot do that down in those leagues. You just can't. I'm like, well, there's evidence now you can. I seen Chris Dooling quickly do it with Partick Thistle, taking over it within 2 weeks. He had them playing a totally different brand of football. Totally different brand of football. It was attacking football. It was getting the ball wide and he had people in the box. There's people who can, but then the flip side is I watched the Queen's Park Dundee game and I don't think there was 6 passes played consecutively at any point in the 2 games. It was one of the worst games of football I've ever watched, but the flip side, it was also really entertaining. There was 6 goals. But I wouldn't have sat. It was 6 events or 7 events, whatever it was. I can't remember if I turned off at one point, but it was like 7 events. I wouldn't have said I enjoyed any of it. It was just entertainment, and that I think is sometimes a problem within our country a little bit. As fans only really care about winning, which is what you're there for. But I think more and more people want a better product because you're paying 20 quid a week to go watch it. So winning 2-1 in a scrappy game is no longer enough. You want to have enjoyed your 90 minutes or your 2 hours away from your family or 2 hours in the freezing cold. You want to be entertained. It's a lot of money now.
What you've just referenced there, it is possible to do it at a low league level. It is possible to change that more traditional style into something more progressive, into something more that we're seeing on the continent. And is that down to just like a new generation of managers? Have we just, because Scotland is a bit well known for sometimes the same old kind of managers just going kind of round and round?
Yeah, I think there'll be evidence that people will touch on to always be like, you can't play like Sean Maloney. Look at how you failed. You can't have an Ian Cathro style team. Look at how he failed. You can't play out from the back in all these games. But then like knowing the fact that Jim Goodwin didn't play out from the back and his teams keep failing, that there is continuing. Jim Duffy went to Clyde and was miserable. There are examples of these experienced heads who know what they're doing and try to stop this new wave of coaches try to play out from the back, but then ignoring the fact that James McPade's got Vernon promoted, Rhys McCabe's got Airdrie promoted. Chris Doolan was very close to Partick Thistle, only having 3 months in the job. Barry Robson took over Aberdeen and completely transformed them from the team that got knocked out of the Scottish Cup to the team that then got into Europe. Like a complete transformation. And these are guys with new ideas, and these are guys that seem to be willing to at least get the ball down and try and play and realise that that's what they would want to do. And I think that's what it is. I think that's all we're seeing, is that all these players wanted to play this type of football 15 years ago when they were playing. And now they're like, well, if I had a chance to coach, I wouldn't be playing the ball over my midfielders. I would want it going through me. So they're now enforcing that as they go, and it will just get progressively better. But whilst teams then revert back and hire the steady Eddie at 60 years old, who doesn't want to do that, there will be games where people are going long and direct and bypassing the midfield just for a fear. But I don't believe these players aren't there. Like, there are players in Scotland that can play at top levels and are capable technically of doing things that you wouldn't. I guess sometimes people wouldn't expect to see. You get League Two midfielders that you probably don't even know their ability because they don't get the opportunity to show it for 90% of their games.
Some of the managers we've seen, you referenced there, obviously your Sean Maloney's, your Ian Cathro. They don't necessarily get the time in Scotland to really transform their sides because, if you're coming into a team that's been playing long ball football and you're trying to turn them into a team that actually passes the ball and retains possession, it's not going to happen overnight. Are these guys being given enough of an opportunity? Is it just down to Scotland just being a bit Scottish football being a bit risk averse and, just being maybe a bit too conservative sometimes, just sticking with the tried and tested, this is how we've always done it?
it's the risk averse side. Without a shadow of a doubt. It doesn't even necessarily need to be people from like younger people. Like if you remember when Postecoglou came in, Postecoglou was ridiculed and by people who clearly knew nothing about him. People like Chris Boyd, who was a fantastic goal scorer at Scottish football. But anytime Chris Boyd went to a league or a level in which he had to be more than just somebody that could put a ball in the net, he failed. That was just the reality. He failed because there was too much expected of him. And then he's slagging off people like Ian Cathro, Sean Maloney, for maybe being a bit outside the box. Sean Maloney was a quiet character. Ian Cathro was an analyst before that. I think people are too easy to judge because they want to see, oh, that's the manager that, oh, I remember when he played 20 years ago, and I remember that he was Dundee manager then, and he's been around the FA. We know him. We're familiar with that person, and they just don't want necessarily change. And it's why I think the Premier League especially needs to be kind of restructured, because whether or not you like it, the top two is probably always going to be who the top two are. Outside of that, instead of having that wee split, there should maybe be more incentive for the teams that finished third to eighth to all still have Europe to play for near the end of the season, rather than just saying third and fourth, get it, that's it. And then you might have a Hibs who are sitting eighth in the league with a Sean Maloney who's just come in, but you could maybe see building slightly, but the results maybe aren't there, and going similar to the MLS playoff style, you go, I know we're not third in the league, but we're still 2 points inside the European playoff we're going to go into. And if that's still there, do we need to change? Because we believe this is a guy 6 months ago that was going to take us forward. He was working with players like Kevin De Bruyne, who seemed to be doing all right at Belgium. He must be doing something right. And then being like, right, well, we don't need to act because we're not going to finish in the bottom six and be locked out of Europe. We might still have that incentive. So we're fine. We keep him and we let him get through. And you do something, you see it in the MLS all the time. You sometimes see those teams that just come break through and they become the team that goes and wins the playoff and end up going into the CONCACAF Champions League. And then it becomes a totally different transformed team. And then you've got maybe some backing, and it might give people more relaxation and players less inclined to shut off because they've not finished in the bottom six and their season's kind of done. They're still going to play for Europe, so they still need, if they want to play in Europe, the incentive's there for them to keep working for the manager, because that's always the thing you hear. Is they've down tools, they're not playing for the manager, the changing room's gone. You're like, well, do you want to play European football in 5 weeks? Because that's what's still on offer if you get your finger out. So yeah, I do think that's definitely one thing. I'm not saying Sean Maloney would have turned it around, but I remember a lot of Hibs fans criticising Lee Johnson 3-4 months ago, and I think Hibs are a much better side now than they were 4 months ago under the same manager who got a bit of time and a bit of backing. So I don't always necessarily think. I mean, there'll be times I agree with fans, and I know that it's over, but yeah, it's not a good look when somebody like Hearts appoint Ian Cathro and then bail on it so quickly, or they appoint Sean Maloney.
Yeah, if you're going to appoint a manager, and the board have clearly had conversations about style of play and stuff, and then if you're gonna go for that appointee, you've got to give them a little bit of time to actually implement their ideas. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so talk to me about the Celtic coaching convention then, and kind of what impressed you about that.
Okay, so I'm a big Rangers fan. I don't just follow Rangers, so like the abuse I got off my brother for a start was one thing, but as an aspiring coach, the minute I got the opportunity to go, because it was only open to people with specific licenses and people from outside, for people from the US side that were coming over. So the minute I'd got the opportunity to go, because Postecoglou was somebody that if he'd been in any other league at any other team, he's somebody I would have enjoyed. The style of football, the way they played, the way they destroyed teams, the way they attack consistently, because that's something that I just think's so natural. When I heard him speak, so we seen the first team train. Now, he does nothing on the training ground except match prep. So the day before a match, he'll do some possession, some phases of play, where they want to attack, how they want to attack, and so on. But it's mainly run by Kennedy Kuehl and Strachan. Harry Kuehl does a lot of one-to-one stuff with the players. That was one thing that I found impressive, because with the way Postecoglou plays with his fullbacks, he was talking about a player like Greg Taylor, will have never received the ball with his back to goal, 25 yards from goal, because he's always been a left back. He goes, so you need to retrain him completely on body positioning, how to receive the ball and where the pass is going to be, because he's been so used to getting the ball out in the touchline. You can go down the line or you can go back inside, you can chip up in a channel. He now needs to see a different pitch. So they'll all get 5 minutes, Ralston, Johnstone, and they'll all get different dynamics of where they're going to be then when they'd attack the box, where they get into the box, where they should be. So I really like that, because I've always felt like when I was doing university coaching, I was like, why wouldn't I pull a couple of players out to do individual things? It only takes 5 minutes to do it with a group, instead of being like, I'll only get them 90 minutes twice a week. That's what I need to do at the maximum. So that was something to see how little time it actually takes to pull somebody aside and do some body shape work, passing work, and visualising where you'd be in the pitch, stuff like that. Then you went back to Celtic Park and Postecoglou done a presentation. So he done the analysis of his team and how he wants his teams to play. And one of the things I loved, because Rangers haven't done this in the time that I've been coaching, and I remember Gerrard put up like walls around the training ground so that people couldn't see in, because he wanted closed door. And one of the things Postecoglou said was, there's no secrets here. It's like, everyone knows how we play. He goes, it's your job to try and stop it. He goes, this is what I do. And he opened up everything. Everything was explained from start to finish, how he decided this is the way they play, where people should attack, how they should attack, how they were going to attack Motherwell, because that's the team they were playing on Saturday. Didn't care, because he believed fully in his own philosophy that no matter what they did, they were going to beat Motherwell on Saturday. They were going to be the better team. I really liked that. But the thing he said, and it did feel like maybe a wee slide dig at Scottish football in general, but he did say he could never understand a team that if his team have just hit a shot that's went off the post and went wide, and that team have now got a goal kick where Celtic have maybe had possession for 90 seconds, he goes, he could never understand why that team's first thought is to move everyone away from their goal and put a ball up in the air in a country where the weather is so unpredictable, and expect that you will still have that ball in 10 seconds' time. Whereas if you play it to two centre-halves inside your box, you've got a better chance of retaining that ball and causing us harm by playing through us. And it just seemed so... It was nothing that I hadn't thought of before, but I was like, that's exactly... Like, you're the type of guy that I would want in charge of the FA. You're the type of guy I'd want as in charge of like a full football programme on what we should be doing, and just get away from this, what I believe is a really negative way of playing football, and just giving up for a 50-50 all the time. The amount of work he clearly does with his analysts was something that was refreshing, because he self-admittedly, like maybe 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, maybe before Australian's head job, that it was maybe like an analyst had to come to him and explain to him what they were doing. And slowly but surely that was something that became on board. I do feel like Peter Houston's their head of analysis, who was a Dundee United manager involved with Scotland with Craig Levein, and he was saying that even he's seen a progression in how engaged the analysts are with the first team, the B team, the 20s and the 18s, and how it's all seamlessly linked through the same analysts, coaches being involved with the first team, players dropping up for the B team and coming back down to see what they would do at their clubs. It was just really, really a really good presentation from him, showing exactly what I think all clubs should do, is having a seamless 16s, 18s, 20s through to the first team. But as we discussed before recording, the flip side of that is Postecoglou's just left, and potentially with all his staff. But you've still got McManus O'Day at the 20s, you've still got Stuart McLaren at the 18s. You've still got those coaches linked in there who will keep that methodology for as long as Celtic want that methodology, and it will produce. If from 16 years old you're creating a right back that suits the first team, when that right back becomes 21, he should be ready to play the first team. But that's why Scottish football clubs need to develop their identity and not just have whatever identity of the coach that's in charge at the time. There needs to be a consistent approach. That's why teams like Ajax are so successful. And Ajax football inside has never changed in 40 years.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of, manager is God, head coach is God kind of approach. I think, where whoever is coming in as the manager is kind of expected to just kind of dictate everything that's going on during their tenure, whereas really what needs to happen and what you see at all the top clubs. And I get it. It's obviously really difficult when there's limited resources, especially, you know, in the lower down in Scottish football. But having some sort of strategy, having some sort of identity, culture, where you are bringing players through from an early age, getting them to mirror, because that was something, you know, you mentioned to me, getting those academy players mirroring the first team, right? So that they can all kind of seamlessly move through. And it should also be the same as well for the Scottish setup as well, you know, at international level as well. Yeah, but it's obviously easier said than done, but clubs really do need to have some sort of strategy and identity that goes beyond just whatever manager they have in at any play, you know, at any point in time. Because Postecoglou obviously was clearly a brilliant manager, is a brilliant manager. But really what Celtic should be doing is bringing in someone who can, you know, step into his shoes fairly seamlessly and not too much behind the scenes changes.
And that's exactly how I feel about a club actually having a philosophy. Because if you appoint someone that's not got, it's what happened with Celtic Rodgers to Lennon. Lennon won some trophies and Celtic gave him the job. And it was like, but Brendan Rodgers has just created something, a clear attacking style of football, and you've given it to somebody who's more of a man manager, a motivator than anything else. And it's just totally ripped apart what was being created there. And this is what I think Brighton have done well with Potter to De Zerbi. And what they'll do after De Zerbi is it'll be someone, they're sitting, David Weir is sitting right now going, right, if De Zerbi got offered the Chelsea job in the summer, or if he got offered a job in the summer, they've probably already got 5 people that play similar football to the players they currently have recruited for the next year, so that if the approach came from De Zerbi, they jump right away and they find one of those 5 people and they become the next manager. And then underneath that, whatever they've done with the academy, they don't need to change anything because they've brought in a coach that's going to continue to play the same way. And then Brighton are a club now that have an identity. I couldn't stop the average football fan in Scotland and say, what's Motherwell's style of football? You could stop most football fans in Scotland and go, how did Brighton play? And they'd be able to tell you. That's what bothers me a little. I know it's because the Premier League's on TV all the time, but it's also because you will sit down and watch a Brighton game because they're good to watch. There's no secret sauce there. They're enjoyable to watch. So are Brentford. These teams are enjoyable, so people will watch them. Scottish football isn't enjoyable, and thus far there's the TV deals we get, and it's why the style of it. But it's just, I don't believe it's difficult. I don't believe what people are suggesting is out of the box. It's
no, it's not. And I know we're obviously referencing Premier League clubs, but you can also equally look at the likes of Bodo Glimt, right? Who are they play in a 5,000 capacity stadium in the Arctic Circle, you know, in a town that's smaller than Perth, probably. It's a tiny club by any stretch of the imagination. They obviously, you know, hammered Celtic. They thrashed Roma 6-1. Did they get to the semi-finals of the Europa League? Yep. How are the likes of Aberdeen, Hearts and Hibs not able to get to that same level? What Bodo Glimt have got is an amazing strategy of, you know, a great player trading model, a great way of getting academy players through, and just clear identity that runs throughout the club. So it isn't this idea it isn't just reserved for clubs with loads of money. It can be done on a smaller scale.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I believe teams. There's this idea that I always hear that, like, if you're Aberdeen, you're away up north and you're picking from people that are up north, and that's going to be difficult. But I mean, Aberdeen are building an academy. Aberdeen are the 3rd biggest club in Scotland as far as, like.
Well, hold on. There's a bit of an argument on Twitter at the moment with Hearts fans and the 2 chairmen going at each other, right?
Oh, is that what? Right, okay.
Yeah.
But for me, that would be it. It would be the 3rd biggest club. I think there needs to be that element of people bringing players through. The biggest problem we've got is, forgive me, I can't remember the boy's name, but whoever the boy Aberdeen having loaned from Liverpool this year. For the
Leighton Clarkson?
Is that it? Since Barry Robson's taken over, he's been outstanding. That kid looks like somebody you would get on loan from a Premier League club down in England, but he's taken up the spot of a Scottish guy. Like there will be a Scottish Leighton Clarkson sitting there that isn't getting a chance because this guy's deemed superior. But then to me, it's just a case of John Collins always said this. John Collins said this a couple of times when he was at Celtic. They would look at the under-18s centre halves and they would go, could he play left centre half? Could he come up and train with us? What's his weaknesses? And the guy was like, oh, he's always struggled with his left foot. And John Collins was like, he's been here since he was 8. How's he still struggling with his left foot? And everyone was like claiming it was really, really arrogant and simplified. But no. As a coach, if you've identified, if that's always been a problem and you've had the boy for 10 years and he's still not on his left foot, there's a real problem with what you've been doing with the kid.
Yeah.
And this will be Celtic who'll have had them 3 nights a week they'll probably been at high school that Celtic have had access to them during the day. And they're still saying at 18s, he's got a problem with his left foot. And that's just blindness. That's just somebody not doing their job. And I don't know where that maybe comes from. I don't know if it's an element of trying to win instead of producing players. But that was probably the secondary thing that I really enjoyed from the Celtic convention was Stuart McLaren's stuff. He's the under-18s head coach. And it was so much about what they were trying to do, which would produce players for the Celtic first team, produce players for Celtic's Champions League teams, and produce players for the Scotland national side.
Okay. So just tell me a little bit more about that then. So, because I'm going to preempt you a little bit, but I guess there's a real focus, I think, throughout Scottish football, and obviously for a good reason. There's a lot of focus on winning, which is obviously great. But lower down the age levels, that maybe isn't as important, just like getting a win at all costs, right? So yeah, talk to me about what Stuart said.
Yeah, there's a nice balance between that. I do think that was one of the things he said was they still want the players to have created a winning mentality, because at the end all they're going to have to deal with being a Celtic player and dealing with the pressure of expected to win trophies all the time. So you can't totally pretend that you're negating the winning it factor, but the key factor is creating players that can go play for Celtic, whether that is tactically, technically, having the right attributes to go forward and do that, having the right personality to do so. But their whole model was around how many Celtic academy players had played through all the age groups and played for the first team, won the title, and played in the Champions League. And I think it might have been like 19 players since the millennium. And their aim is to have 39 by another 10 years' time. So they want another 20 to feature. Then they're calling out the people. Well, it'd be Ben Summers. He did it. Who will the players be? But they're identifying Rocco Vata, the players that will come through and do that. And that is their whole aim, to consistently just push these boys on and make sure they are equipped for the first team rather than going and grinding out a win against Hibs. The under-18s.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, listen, John, this has been a great chat. I think we've only just skimmed the surface on pretty much all of these issues, which is, So basically all of these topics we're going to hopefully explore in further detail in further episodes. So we'll be doing an episode on, league reconstruction. We'll be doing an episode on academy players and B teams and all that sort of stuff. So stay tuned for further episodes coming out. But one final question, which I'm going to ask every guest who's on the podcast: if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about Scottish football, what would it be?
I would distribute the money based on the teams that have played the most Scottish under-23 players throughout a season. So if Hibs had played more under-23 players than Rangers had or Celtic had throughout that season, Hibs get the bigger portion of the pot from the TV deal outside the prize money for winning the league. I would incentivise, on top of that, incentivise youth players playing. The MLS give people, I think it's $5,000 every time an under-21 plays in the MLS. A team get $5,000 from the American FA. That would be, if I had a magic wand or I had the fund available, there would be a pot split up for teams who play the most Scottish under 23 players in a season, and every time somebody from the academy under 21s played in a first team game, you got a $2,000 reward.
That is a very interesting proposition. I love it. We certainly, well, put it this way, we certainly need to get more young Scottish players playing in our league at a very minimum. So yeah, if there's a way to incentivize that, why not? Listen, John, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure I'll be getting you back on the podcast at some point in the future.
No, I really appreciate it, Kieran.